So I thought it would be nice to open in prayer. So would anybody like to do that for us?
I certainly can, but I want to leave it open for anyone else who wants to do it. So, hearing none, I'll go ahead.
Thank
The
you.
Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious God, thank you for these people. Thank you for the resources that you've given us, both people, but also financial, to do our work. We ask that you would bless us with wisdom and insight and faith as we continue to monitor the finances of this synod. All that we would do would be to spread your love. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So my name is Alan Easley, and I'm the Synod Treasurer. And my home congregation is Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Claremont, California, where I am also the treasurer. We're a pretty small group, so I thought it might be nice to just go around and have each of you introduce yourselves and your home church and your role in your church or in the synod. So I'll start with you, Jeff, and then we can just sort of
Just
I'll go
each
around
person
according
can.
to my screen.
That works. Okay, I'm Jeff Kors. I am the Synod Vice President, and my home congregation is St. Peter's by the Sea in Ocean Beach.
Thank you. And Richard,
Yes, I'm Richard Doring, and that name may be familiar to you. Edgar Doring was pastor, I believe, at Good Shepherd many decades ago, and I had several other uncles who were ministers and a grandfather. But I'm a member and lifelong of St. Peter's by the Sea Lutheran Church, and uh, I'm the currently the financial secretary of our church endowment fund.
thank you. And Alvar,
You're muted.
yeah, we can't hear you if you're talking.
He's
It says
typing in
he's
the chat.
typing.
Yeah.
So Inger, why don't you go next?
My name is Inger Swanson, and I'm with Shepherd of the Valley Lutheran Church in La Mesa. And I do a little bit of everything, but mostly in charge of hospitality and making sure everything else gets done.
And Bishop, even though everybody knows you, we'll give you a chance to
Well, I'm going
introduce
to be the
yourself.
third person who is a member of St. Peter's by the Sea in Ocean Beach. So we are heavily represented here.
That's
It's
great.
part of the congregational takeover of the synod.
Great. And then Matt,
Thank you, Alan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Cox. I'm from St. Olaf Lutheran Church in Garden Grove. I can now say this with pride. I'm a former congregational president. But once you've been a president, your mind always still thinks about the congregation in that way. And in that way, I think about the synod. And that's why I'm here, Alan. I really praise God for the work that you do. And I'm here to support you in any way I can.
thank you. And then finally Terry, who may be the most important person here. But
Oh, please, no. I'm Terry Robertson. I've served on the office of the bishop's staff for 26 years now, so it's been a while. And I serve as executive assistant for finance and administration. I'm a member of First Lutheran in Fullerton, where I serve as the council president, and I'm the financial secretary. So, yep.
thank you. Well, I'm going to try to go through the finance materials in the assembly notebook fairly quickly to leave time for discussion and questions and answers. Um, oh, I'm sorry, Terry, you were pointing.
Well, I would say Alvar's got his introduction in the chat, so
Oh, okay.
he's from
Thank you.
STEM. Thank you, Alvar.
We're a small group, so I really think if you have questions as we're going along, you should just raise them at the point where they come up rather than trying to wait until the end and then be jumping back and forth. You can use the raised hand function to signal to Terry that you have a question, which is, I think, the reactions button at the bottom of the screen, or you can type a question into the chat and Terry will be looking at that too and let me know if anyone has questions. Also, it's important to note that the Assembly will be voting on the proposed 27-28 budget at the Assembly on Saturday, June 20th. And should you want to propose amendments to that budget proposal, they have to be submitted by 1:30 p.m. On that date at the latest, although you can certainly submit them earlier, and we'll talk a little bit at the end about exactly how to do that. So we're going to start with slide 1, and I think Terry's going to share her screen to pop that up.
I just want to say some of them may look small to you, so if you absolutely can't read, I'll try to make them as large as I can, and if it doesn't all fit on the screen, I'll try to scroll so you can see it. So, but if it's not working for you, let me know.
So this is slide 3-1, and I apologize that we had a late correction to this slide. So after everything was sent out, we realized that Excel was pulling data from the wrong columns to plug into this particular slide, and so everything was off by a year. So we submitted a correction, I think, last Monday. And this is the corrected version, but we apologize for any confusion that might have caused. But this slide shows historical trends in financial gifts to the Synod over a 7-year period from 2019-20 to 2025-26. And the blue line, the top line, is total gifts. The red line is mission support, which is the tithes that come to the Synod from congregations. The green line down at the bottom is designated gifts to ELCA causes. So that would be things like ELCA World Hunger or ELCA Disaster Relief, domestic or international. All of these come also from congregations, but instead of being just pure mission support, they're designated for specific ELCA domestic and global ministries. And then the purple is all other designated gifts from congregations. So they might be to something like LRCC or Lutheran Social Services, or notable specific needs like Hawaii wildfire or flood relief. But mission support is the largest item, which represents, as we'll see shortly, roughly half of the Synod's budget every year. And I think this one is important to call out too for the kind of the history that we have here, because you can see that although there are occasional small upticks in mission support, that the general overall trend has been a slow decline. Although this past year, we did have a little bit of an uptick again. And so last year, mission support was $1.181 million. One thing that's noticeable about this slide, which I'm sure some of you wonder about, is the uptick on the purple line in 23-24, which is also replicated in the blue line up at the top, but they're both from the same thing. and that was gifts designated for Hawaii wildfire relief. We've been receiving those gifts for a while now, and they continue to come in, but the bulk of the money came in 23, 24, and about 154,000 of it was Hawaii wildfire relief. And so that caused that big jump that you see in 23, 24, and then it went back down in 24, 25. Historically, this number tends to fluctuate between 250 and 350,000. So the 24, 25 number and the 25, 26 number are basically a return to the mean. The next slide is the same information on financial gifts to the Synod, but for 1 year, 25, 26, and in pie chart format, and with one additional income source. So in the blue, the right part of the pie chart, you see mission support from congregations. That's the 1.181 million, which represents 53.6% of our revenue, plus 1.4 million in mission support receivables, which is an auditor adjustment that are in red down at the very bottom, that teeny sliver there.
Actually,
And
Alan,
then,
it's just 30,000, not 1.4%, but not 1.4 million.
oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I meant
Yeah, no, that's
1.
okay. I
Yeah,
just went, we don't have that much in receivables.
yeah. So then we have designated gifts from our congregations broken out into 3 main categories here. Designated gifts to ELCA Ministries, orange, Pacifica Ministries, purple, and other designated ministries, green, and those all total to about $448,000. The other income that's not that's included in the pie chart, but was not included on the previous slide with the line chart, is non-congregational income, which is on the upper left side of the pie chart. I think I would call that reddish brown. This is a portion of Synod income that fluctuates quite a bit from year to year. In 23, 24, it was 562,000. In 24, 25, it was 1.434 million, including over 1 million in funds received from proceeds of one closed congregation. And then in 25, 26, it dropped to a more normal 542,000. This income category includes support from the ELCA for our Director for Evangelical Mission, which is a position that we share with the ELCA, and it also includes the allocation of resources held by the Synod to help fund Synod activities. Next slide, 3-3, is looking at our actual expenses in 25, 26. So the darker blue up in the upper right corner is mission support to the ELCA, and the green, which is down at the bottom, the green is grants to institutions and agencies. And these are shown in the pie chart as percentages of total expenditures for the year. But these expenditures are funded by the 1.181 million in mission support received from congregations that was shown in the previous pie chart. And it's important to know that 51% of the mission support that we receive in any year, we pass on to the ELCA. That's the dark blue again. And 8.2% of the mission support that we receive is awarded to a list of institutions and agencies that the Synod has been supporting for some time. That's the green at the bottom. The yellow slice of the pie is all the designated gifts from congregations noted on the prior slide, but totaled up here and passed through to the designated places. And then the light blue slice on the left represents 49% of the expenses for the year. And that's Synod administration, the expenses necessary to sustain and support Synod operations. Of the total Synod administration expenses, roughly 83% is compensation and benefits. The rest includes other administrative costs, including insurance, equipment leases, contract services, professional services, including annual audit expenses, utilities, etc. And the thin purple slice at the bottom is support for Synod ministries, an amount that we've been trying to grow slowly, which requires not only funding, but also finding people to serve as leaders of these ministries. The next slide. This is what is often known as a balance sheet or a statement of financial position. It shows our financial position at the end of the 25-26 fiscal year, and it shows that we have assets of 16.97 million and offsetting liabilities and equities, including roughly 12 million in financial assets that are invested in a variety of vehicles, including CDs, money market funds, mutual funds. We have 2.32 million in fixed assets related primarily to our Center for Learning in Santa Ana. And the balance sheet totals all of our assets and then offsets them with what we call liabilities, which include things like accounts payable and lease obligations. But liabilities also include designated funds, temporarily restricted funds, and permanently restricted funds. Permanently restricted funds are endowment funds created by a donor gift. And because of the nature of an endowment, earnings from the funds may be awarded pursuant to the donor's intent, but the corpus may not be touched. Temporarily restricted funds are donations given for a restricted purpose, like Hawaii wildfire relief, and those funds may only be used for the restricted purposes designated by the donor. And then designated funds are funds that the Synod Council set aside for specific purposes. But all three of these categories, permanently restricted, temporarily restricted, and designated, are considered liabilities because the restrictions on their use prevent them from being used for any purpose desired by the Synod. So the highlighted colors, yellow, blue, green, and orange, are there to make it easier for you to connect these balance sheet numbers with the pie chart that follows on the next page. So if we can move to that pie chart. I'm sorry, before we get to the pie chart, the balance sheet or the statement of financial position takes all of our assets and subtracts from them all of our liabilities, including designated and restricted funds. And then what's left is our unencumbered equity, which last year was 2.172 million. And if we add all our liabilities and equity, that number totals 16.971 million, which equals our total assets of 16.971 million. So that's why we sometimes call this a balance sheet, because what it's doing is it's balancing all of our assets against our liabilities and equity. So now the next slide. And this is really an attempt to have a more visual presentation of the financial assets of the Synod and how they're distributed between unrestricted versus designated or restricted assets. And the full pie chart is all of our financial assets, which are roughly $12 million. The blue is 8.9 million in Synod Council designated funds. The green represents 2.77 million in temporarily restricted funds, and the orange is 256,000 of permanently restricted or endowment funds. And the yellow is what remains of the 12 million, which is $154,000 in unrestricted, undesignated cash. And we decided this year to try to present this way in this pie chart because I think it's easier to understand the limitations on what we can do with all of the money that the Synod has. Because I think when people look at the financial statement and they see that our assets total nearly $17 million, there's a tendency to assume that the Synod has the resources to do whatever it wants without restriction. But the fact is, as the pie chart shows, that most of our financial assets totaling 12 million are restricted or designated. So we're not free to spend them at will on whatever we want. The restricted funds have donor imposed restrictions, which the Synod is not at liberty to change or ignore. A donor can do that. This year, for example, a donor to the Hawaii Wildfire Relief Fund elected to shift some of their donation as yet unspent from Hawaii Wildfire Relief to Hawaii Flood Relief. The donor could do that, but the Synod could not do it on its own, no matter how much we might have thought it would make sense. Designated funds are different because they've been designated for specific purposes by the Synod Council. So the Council has the authority to change those designations if it desires. But that means taking money that's been previously designated for one purpose and designating it for a different purpose. So next pie chart.
Alan, before we get too far down,
Yes.
speaking of shifting funds, could you go back to the assets sheet and the interfund loans receivable is a large number, 2.7 million. And what are those types of funds? And are there any concerns about the ability to repay them from one fund to another?
Terry, I'll let you take that one, except that I think that's a number that balances out on both sides of this balance sheet. But
Yeah.
So there's receivables and there's payable.
Right. And it's only adjusted by the auditor through an auditor's adjusting entry at the end of the year. So it's just the movement. We some of the funds that we have that we spend and pay out of our checking account are funds for other ministries that like synodically authorized worshiping communities. We support those, and those transfers back and forth between those funds equal that, but you can see it is both an asset, it's on the asset side and the liability side. So they don't affect any of these balances in here. It's just the way the auditor adjusts for those expenditures and income through the year. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but
I guess my point is more, what causes the loan to be needed and how assured is there that the monies will be repaid?
Well, it's not necessarily a loan. It's just the transfer because we have these other ministries, synodically authorized worshiping communities, and different things that are different. I don't know if you use QuickBooks, but different classes in QuickBooks that don't affect our general funds, that the income and expense for those are adjusted in that. We pay these expenses through our checking account, so that's how we do those. Although the income that is received, like through our mission fund, doesn't affect this account, the general fund here that's represented. And the auditor calculates those each year and makes an adjusting journal entry that affects both parts of this, the liability side and the asset side.
So is it
So
fair to
it's
say
always
that,
gonna, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was, go ahead, Alan, with your point.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's always the case that the interfund loans payable number is going to be matched by the identical number on the other side, interfund loans receivable. So you can see here on the balance sheet that we have 2.701496 million on both entries, right? So they cancel each other out.
And so it's fair to say that this is not a way to essentially spend more money than we have, but rather just the normal movement of monies between funds.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
and most of those ministries are the funds are come from our mission funds, which is a large part of our, and we'll see on the next slides, large part of our designated funds. So the funds are there. It's not not receivable in the sense of we have to get the money to pay that, but because we've got that. It's just movement in and out because all of our fund expenditures come from our checking account. So we don't have multiple bank accounts, multiple checking accounts that are just for these synodically authorized worshiping communities or other entities that we support.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So then back to I think we're on slide 3.6. So now we're taking a look at the 8.9 million in Synod Council designated funds and this addresses how those funds are designated and the different categories of designations to help people understand better why such a large amount of money there has been designated by the Synod for various purposes. And the largest group is the Synod's Mission Fund, which Terry was mentioning briefly a minute ago, and that has 4.62 million. That's the blue portion on the right side of the pie. And these funds come from the closure of congregations when the congregation elects to direct those funds to the synod without restriction, and the council elects to direct them to the synod's mission fund. And we have a mission fund committee that operates under the oversight of the council that uses these funds, these mission funds, to support the development of new ministries, ethnic ministries, redevelopment of existing ministries, and growth of synodically authorized worshiping communities, or what we call SOCs, and synodically authorized outreach ministries, which we call SOMs. And the Mission Fund Committee typically spends a little over $500,000 a year on these various efforts. To what we're basically trying to do is take money that we got from closed congregations and redeploy it to try and grow the ministries that we think are important to try to develop. The green portion of the pie is 1.73 million designated by council for support of Synod operations under its annual budget. And these funds also typically come from the closure of congregations. So in any given year, a portion of the synodical support fund might support between 15 and 25% of the annual Synod budget. So we're carving out a smaller piece of the money that flows in from closed congregations and using it to support continued important Synod activities. Then the orange is 1.74 million designated to support ethnic ministries, including Latino and border ministries, African descent ministries, and Arabic ministries. The purple slice is $635,000 designated by the council to supplement the temporarily and permanently restricted funds that support the award of scholarships and grants, including things like the Matthew 25 grants, the GEM grants, the Robert L. Miller scholarships, Warner Trust grants, Reverend Lori Line scholarships. So all of these scholarships and grants are supported by temporarily and permanently restricted funds, but the Synod Council has added this $635,000 to supplement those funds so that we can award more money under those grants and scholarships. And then finally, the red is 167,000 is a variety of small funds designated to support things like bishop transition expenses, assembly carryover, and cooperative candidacy carryover. And again, while the Synod Council can redesignate any of these funds for different purposes, any such decision would require taking funds from one pool to add them to another pool, or waiting until new funds flow into the Synod and become available, and then deciding to designate all or a portion of those new funds to specific causes that are not currently being addressed. Questions about any of that? Okay, so now we're going to shift to looking at the budget that's being presented to the Assembly on June 20th. And I want to start with this slide, which is slide 3-8, and then we're going to go back to 3-7 in a minute. But I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about understanding how the budgeting process works in the Synod and why it is that we're looking in June at approving a budget for 27-28, which seems like a long ways off. The thing that's important to understand is that the Synod's fiscal year runs from February of one year to January of the next year. So we are right now 4 months into the 26-27 budget year. February, March, April, May. So it's obviously too late now to set and approve the 26-27 budget because we're a third of the way through the budget year already. So instead, we're going to ask the Assembly on June 20th to approve the 27-28 budget. But the 27-28 budget year doesn't start for another 8 months, and it extends through a period that's going to end 20 months from now. So last year, if we go back to last year's Assembly 2025, that year, the Assembly voting members were asked to approve the 26-27 budget that was being recommended by the Synod Council based on the information that was available at the time. But of course, when the budget year starts 8 months later, it's not shocking that sometimes assumptions and needs have changed or shifted. So in slides 3-8 through 3-15, we have before us 5 different columns of data. The first column, for going from left to right, the first is 24-25 audited actuals. And then next to that, 25-26 audited actuals. So 2 years of historical data. And then the 26-27 budget that the Assembly approved last June. And then what we call the spend plan for 26-27. And the idea here is that when we look at the 26-27 budget as the year starts, although the object is to follow as closely as possible the budget approved by the Assembly, we have to recognize that this budget was approved 8 months before the start of the budget year, and assumptions and circumstances change. So the spending plan is an adjustment to the budget approved by the Synod Assembly last June of 2025. And the spend plan is approved by Synod Council in March 2026. And basically, it's tweaking the approved budget based on what we now know that we didn't know back when it was originally approved. So I think of it as a spend plan for how to live the 26-27 budget year. And then finally, the right-hand column is the one in blue, and that's the budget that we'll be asking the Assembly to approve for 27-28. Built on what we've learned from the budget year just ended and the year that we're now living in. So then if we go back to slide 3-7, this slide outlines the basic assumptions that drive both the spend plan for 26-27, which Council adopted in March, and the budget for 27-28, which we're going to ask the Assembly to adopt next month. For starters, our spend plans and budgets are largely driven by the mission support we receive from our congregations. As I think I mentioned earlier, that represents just over 50% of the income that supports the budget. And because mission support actuals for 25-26 ended up being slightly lower than what we anticipated a year ago, we adjusted the assumption about mission support in the 26-27 spend plan downward from what was approved last year to something that more closely matches the actuals for the year just ended. And then in the 27-28 budget year, we're presenting to the Assembly, we assume mission support would stay flat. And then we have assumptions about money we expect to receive from the ELCA to support the shared director for evangelical mission position, and money we anticipate drawing from designated funds to support synodical operations. And then on the expense side, we have 51% of the mission support that we think we're going to receive that would be passed on to the ELCA, and 8.2% of mission support that we distribute as grants to a list of institutions and agencies. And then we have the increases to salary and benefits. We're assuming 3% or we've adopted, 3% in the 26-27 spend plan. And we have placed in the budget as a placeholder for 27-28 an assumption of a 2% increase in 27-28. And that latter is not designed to say this is what we think will happen or what we hope will happen. It's just a placeholder because 27-28 is so far out in the future that it's difficult right now to set compensation increases with any exactitude for that year. So we just put in 2% and then we'll adjust it later. So now, again, slide 3-8. This slide summarizes the budget information that's presented in greater line-by-line detail on slides 3-9 through 3-15. So on the income side, we have mission support in the 26-27 spend plan and 27-28 budget staying even with the 25-26 actuals. Restricted and designated contributions fluctuate a little bit from year to year, but generally are in the 400,000 range. And this doesn't really impact our budget because these are pass-throughs. This is designated contributions that we get from our congregations and individual donors that we then pass on to the recipients designated by the donors. Non-congregation income fluctuates a lot more, largely dependent on whether we have closed congregations with the proceeds generated by the closing coming to the synod. And when that does happen, some of those funds are put into a synodical support fund to support the day-to-day work of the synod. But a significant amount of these funds, as I mentioned, don't actually flow into the budget, but are added to the mission fund, which we use to support the development of new ministries, ethnic ministries, redevelopment of existing ministries. On the expense side, the benevolence expenses are also very much driven by the mission support and designated contributions received from our congregations. Synod office expenses include everything related to the operations of the synod, including comp and benefits for staff and all of the other operational expenses listed. The growth in comp and benefits is partly due to cost of living increases, but some of it is due to staffing adjustments where we add staff to meet important objectives of the synod, including things like candidacy coordination, anti-racism, Latin Aid ministry, and communications. And then we have important work being done by various ministry teams, and we are trying as best we can to increase the support for and involvement in these activities. So total expenses under the spend plan for 26-27 are about 2.37 million, and for the budget to be presented for assembly approval for 27-28, about 2.4 million. The next slide, starting with slide 3-9, and then going all the way through 3-15, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the line-by-line details of the budget, but I want to highlight a few things. First, on page 3-9, under non-congregation income, the fifth line down is something designated funds support income. These are the funds that I've alluded to that have been designated to support synodical operations. So as I mentioned earlier, when a congregation closes, funds generated by the closing are often left to the synod to use for a variety of purposes. And a lot of the money goes to mission funds to support new and existing ministries. But a portion of these funds has been designated for synodical support for the vital operations of the synod, and this budget line represents our current estimate of how much of these funds we will need to balance the budget. So if it turns out that we need less, then this number will shrink. If we need more to balance the budget, this number will grow. But again, it typically roughly 15 to 25% of the synod's operating budget is supported by funds coming out of this synodical support fund. Second, on the bottom of slide 3-9, the first line of expenses is mission support to the ELCA. That's the 51% of mission support that we get as a synod that we pass on to the church-wide organization. And then at the bottom of the slide under programs, grants, and partnerships, we have a list of the institutions and agencies that continues on to page 3-10 that are beneficiaries of the 8.2% of undesignated mission support received by congregations that the Synod passes on to these agencies. The total mission support grants line, roughly one half of the way down page 3-10, is calculated each year as 8.2% of the total mission support received that year. So just as mission support fluctuates, so does the 8.2% designated for these grants. And most of the individual grants are based on a percentage of the total that makes up the 8.2%. Third, below the mission support grants to institutions and agencies is a category of other Synod support grants. And I just want to highlight the last line in this group, which is Theoasis support. I want to mention this because at the 2025 Assembly, there was a last minute suggestion to add funds to the 26-27 budget to support grants to individuals wishing to attend the Theoasis Professional Leaders Conference. And a motion passed as a placeholder for the next year to add $1 to the 26-27 budget to support attendance by individuals who might not otherwise be able to attend, just to remind us to take a closer look at this during the year. And we did, and we ended up in the 25-26 fiscal year awarding $3,050 in grants for this purpose. And we have formally added $3,000 to the 26-27 spend plan for the same purpose, and then the same amount, $3,000, in the 27-28 budget proposal that you will be asked to approve at this year's assembly. So we do try, when we have suggestions of important things, to figure out a way to make it work.
So is that the also the child care support for Theosis that our endowment fund has contributed to?
I can answer that. That is not. That is held in a dedicated account or a temporarily restricted account specifically for that purpose. This 3,000 comes from not designated funds like that. This comes from the Synod's general fund.
Okay, and since we're talking about this page, the campus ministry here at San Diego State, Agape House, um, I noticed in the package that there was discussion, a request for several $1 million support to that building that they have planned. Is there anything else that is going to be discussed or talked about, or any background on that request and where it stands today?
My understanding is that that would have had to come to the assembly as a resolution, and it has not been presented as a resolution. We've been in ongoing discussions with Pastor Darren and the Agape House folks about whether or not we could do what they were suggesting. It would have been much more difficult than they thought. I don't think there's going to be anything at the assembly that requires a decision on that issue, but it's an ongoing conversation.
Okay. And are there ways that the synod publicizes the needs for members of congregations that might want to contribute? Some people, for example, have retirement funds that they want to give away rather than have to pay income tax on. Is the It would seem to me that a little more publicity about the Agape House needs might be able to solicit additional contributions and support.
If I could speak into that real quickly, you're exactly right, Richard. However, we always want to honor that should come from that board at Agape House, that they should be designing and putting out. We'd be happy to amplify their any appeal that they would put out. I've been in conversation with Pastor Kurt from their board and also Pastor Darren about exactly that, trying to figure out how do they make up their shortfall, and that they might want to put out some targeted appeals. The other issue was the guaranteeing of the overall loan that they need to do, and we don't have the overall capacity to do that. So they're looking at potential other partners for that.
Thank you.
Good question, though. Thank you for raising that. The last thing I'll say about benevolence expenses is that the total number, which is 2/3 of the way down, page 10, for the 27-28 budget is 1.152 million, which represents 48% of budgeted synod expenses for the year. So roughly half of our expenses are going into things that we would categorize as benevolence. Now on slides 310 and 311, I'm not going to go into any detail here, but this is comp and benefits, continuing ed, professional expenses, and travel. Slides 311 to 313 are other operational expenses. Slides 313 and 14 involve funding for synodical leadership, events, education, and ministry teams. And we can see some of the details of what's included here, including training and training grants and support for ministry teams. You can see the things we're trying to grow, like ministry team support for anti-racism, tapestry, Amparo, immigration, and border work. And I think it's worthy of note that the total expenses for ministry teams shown on page 3-14 in the middle of the page has grown from $7,405 in 24-25 to $23,000 in the proposed 27-28 budget. So we have tripled the amount dedicated to ministry team support over a 3-year period. But this is the essence of the budget that we will be presenting to the Assembly to vote on the 20th of June. As I mentioned at the beginning, motions to amend the proposed 27-28 budget have to be submitted by Saturday, June 20th, the day of the Assembly at 1:30 p.m. or earlier. There's an email address on the bottom of page 315, and Terry will put this in the chat as well. And you have to use that email address if you want to submit amendment proposals. And the other thing I would add that's not in these notes is that if you are proposing an amendment that adds or increases expenses, it should also recommend a corresponding expense or expenses that can be reduced by the same amount so that we end up with a proposal that leads to a balanced budget. We're almost done, so the last few things are mostly informational, but slides 316 through 318. This is a list by congregation and by region, by conferences of mission support received last year. And you'll notice if you go to the bottom of the last page, page 318, where we see the totals for last year and then, for 24-25 and then 25-26, a slight uptick in 25-26 over the prior year that's just under 3%. And then the next 2-3 pages are grants and scholarships awarded by the Synod during the last year, from Synod designated and temporarily restricted funds. And they include Matthew 25, Latino Ministry Endowments, Warner Trust grants, Catherine Wright scholarships, GEM Fund awards, Robert Miller and Lori Line scholarships, Synod coaching and spiritual direction grants. And if you add up all of that, we awarded in grants and scholarships more than $160,000 last year. Slide 323 is a list of the congregations that provided 2026 mission support intent information, and additional recognition to congregations that said that their plan was to tithe 10% of their current income to mission support. If you don't see your congregation listed as having turned in the mission support intent form, you can contact Terry. She'll put her address in the chat as well, and she can email you the form. And then the last thing is, we're really not going to talk about at all, but it starts on slide 324, is the audited financial reports from our auditors for 25-26. It's a very long document. I would say the most important thing to know is that the conclusion was that our financial statements present fairly and in all material respects the financial position of the Synod at the end of the last fiscal year. So, any other questions?
I would just point out that for someone who's seeing this for the first time, I haven't been to assembly in decades. The acronyms list would be helpful, Terry. ATTB appears to be associated with Hawaii, for example. What is that?
ATTB, is that the question?
Assistant to the
ATTB
bishop.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Assistant to the bishop. So we have several assistants to the bishop. And it's just a short. But you're right. An acronym list would be helpful. A glossary.
Yeah.
And we have different types of assistants to the bishop. We have some full-time assistants to the bishop. Our director for evangelical mission is an assistant to the bishop, as is our assistant to the bishop for Latine ministry. Those are full-time positions. Assistant to the bishop for anti-racism coordination is a half-time position. And then we have 4 regional assistants to the bishop. They are quarter-time positions with the Synod, and they also serve as congregational pastors. And so there are 4 for our 4 geographic regions. There's Hawaii, the Orange County area, the San Diego County area, and then the inland desert area. So those are quarter time. Those 4 are quarter time positions.
And that's probably where you saw the connection to Hawaii, but
Yeah.
because one of those regional assistants is in Hawaii. But
Right. Okay.
Alan,
Well,
there's a
there's a lot
question.
of great effort that is detailed here, and Pastor Dave, Bishop, I wanted to just say that I had the pleasure of having lunch with Pastor Adam, the Arabic minister, and very impressive that you were able to identify and bring him to our synod.
He is a gift to us. Yeah.
Alan, quickly tell me your email address so that I can put it in the chat.
Sure. It's Allen, ALLEN .Easley, EASLEY @gmail.com.
Thank you. It's saved in my thing, so I never pay attention to it.
Right.
So, And I put Alan's email address in there and mine is there. If you have any questions after this, you can email us, or throughout the year, you can email us at any time.
But thank you for attending. Thank you for your interest. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.